I don't know. Say it with me. I don't know. Good God, it is liberating. I am a towering mountain of ignorance. I don't know. We're taught to believe that everything has a reason. Now, I'm glad that we have the desire to understand the world. That results in all sorts of great stuff. We want to know everything. We're humans. We're curious. And maybe it's our culture. Maybe it's just humanity. But I think a lot of the time we end up mixing up thinking something with knowing something. Suddenly, I know that I don't know. But somehow everyone else seems to know. They all know differently from each other, but they all seem to know. What I'm saying is nobody's opinions are correct in the world. And yet it's impossible not to tie your opinions to your concept of self. And often people tie those things so closely together that they begin defending their guesses as if they're defending their very lives. In a way, they are. This is why it can be so impossible to talk about certain topics with certain people. They've tied those suppositions to themselves so tightly with knots of narrative and constructed reality and values that there's just no untying it. And maybe unsurprisingly, in those situations, the best course of action is just to be friends. The world as we perceive it, as we've built it inside of ourselves, is a lie that we tell to ourselves, not out of deception, but out of necessity. We simply cannot understand the world as it is, and so we construct. But sometimes I just have to tell myself the thing that is definitely true, the truest thing I can say, which is that I don't know.
This is the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast with Bob Pondillo and Cass Midgley.
To me, religion says, reach beyond that petty stuff, and it encourages us to be more than our separate egos. You know, I get criticized, obviously, by religious people for having this sort of like pick and choose and that it's not based in theology and it's not this and it's not that. And I'm like, well, then what's the problem with that? I guess the hard part is also that I can't really belong to anything because I'm a nun.
I hear you.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 181 of the Everyone's Agnostic Podcast. I'm Cass Midgley. Today, Bob Pondillo and I interview Corinna Nicolaou, author of A Nun's Story, searching for meaning inside Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and Islam. Corinna is a writer whose work has appeared in the Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, Texas Observer, Salon.com, and Narrative Magazine, among others. Her commentaries have aired on NPR's All Things Considered, and her writing can be found on her blog, One Nun Gets Some, looking at life through the lens of faith, A Nun's Story. Her book has been reviewed in the New York Times, Shelf Awareness, and Publishers Weekly. Today we're going to flip the show upside down. We normally interview people who were raised deeply religious, usually Christian, and then deconstructed their childhood faith to various degrees of unbelief. Corinna is the opposite. She was raised completely secular, and yet in her 40s, she had something of an existential crisis and wondered if she wasn't missing out on something. The majority of the human population identify with some religion or another, and she wondered why and set out to see what all the hubbub was about. Today she identifies as a nun, but has gleaned a little bit here and there from the major world religions, while discarding the bullshit. Her measuring stick is, if it helps me love people, I'll take it. If it tells me certain people should be my enemies, I throw it out. Before we get into our talk with Corinna, I wanted to read a couple of emails. This first one is from Aaron in Youngstown, Ohio. He writes, Hi, Cass. I'm a big fan of your podcast. I recently went through an ordeal. I was raised as a Christian going to church several times a week. I started to deconvert in college, although it's been a long road. I've come out to most of my friends, but not my family. My dad is pretty set in his beliefs, and I think I have a pretty good idea of how my atheism would affect him. Not that he would turn his back on me, but the level of disappointment that he would feel is more than I want to inflict on someone with whom I love and respect so much. My girlfriend's niece, who is only about 5 months old, was life-flighted to the ICU a few days ago. There's nothing like seeing a child on the brink of death to make you realize how powerless we are, and how our whole lives can be flipped upside down at the drop of a hat. It brought up some feelings of how I wanted to pray. I've not had the urge in quite some time, but in a desperate moment, when you know there's nothing we can do, praying makes you feel like you're doing something. I think people in general need to feel in control of their lives, and praying can help you feel that. I, of course, didn't do it, but I was pretty shocked at myself. I feel firmly confident in my belief as an atheist, and I know at this point there's no way I could go back to believing that a God exists. But it made me wonder if I was happier when I was living in a delusional cloud as a Christian. That whole ignorance is bliss thing. I was listening to your show and wondered if you could go back before you deconverted and choose whether to continue as a Christian who really believes or as someone who has deconverted. Which would you choose? I think it's easy to say we would always want to know the truth, but I wonder sometimes if I wouldn't be happier in that bubble. Anyway, I was telling my dad about my girlfriend's niece, and I slipped up and asked him to pray for her. I really let myself down by asking that. I just didn't know what else to say. It almost makes me glad I hadn't told my dad I no longer believe in God, because I could only imagine his reaction that his atheist son had asked him to pray. I'm sure you can imagine all the stuff I heard spending a few nights in the hospital around all my religious family members. It would be almost funny if it weren't so sad. Happy to say that the baby is getting better, and of course all the thanks is going to God instead of the great hospital staff. I have to wonder why no one is blaming God for putting us in this situation in the first place, but this is something atheists have become all too familiar with. Well, I feel myself rambling, so this is probably a good time to stop. I listen to other atheist podcasts, but yours is the only one I feel I could write to about a personal experience such as this. When I listen to your podcast, I feel a lot of similarities to you. Coming from a family full of preachers, I could almost see myself taking the same path as yourself, and it's interesting to hear your perspective. I hope you continue doing what you're doing, and I appreciate the positive impact you're having on people like myself. If you're ever in the area of Youngstown, Ohio, I would love to buy you a cup of coffee or a beer. All the best, Aaron. I also got a note from a friend and listener of the show. I've actually met him in person. He's an airline pilot, commercial airline pilot. Sometimes he touches down in Nashville and says hi, and he says, "Hey, Cass, I'm in Nashville for a few hours today, and it made me think of you guys. I'm a few episodes behind, so I don't know what's going on very recently, but I know the holiday season can be tough for those dealing with depression. So I just wanted to say that I love having you as a part of my life, even if it's just through my ears. And I hope you feel that love regularly. I know there are a lot of people who feel the same. Thanks for being real and for the work you do. I hope you, Bob, and your families are having an amazing holiday, Festivus, Christmas, whatever. Love, Matthew." So as I mentioned already, our guest is Corinna Nicolaou, and she joins us from Washington State via Skype. It's a decent conversation at first, but it really picks up in the end. Still, it may not be for everyone. Corinna is very graceful towards the world's major religions, in kind of a naive way, to be honest. She was never burned by religion like many of us. She has 2 master's degrees and teaches writing at Washington State. And I think there's something here for us to learn, if we're open-minded. Though she remains a devout nun, Nicolaou's experiences reveal points of contact between the religious and the unaffiliated, suggesting that nuns may be radically revising the practice of faith in the near future. We taped this conversation on November 18th, 2017. We interview people you don't know about a subject no one wants to talk about. We hope to encourage people in the process of deconstructing their faith and help curb the loneliness that accompanies it. We think the world's a better place when more people live by sight, not by faith. Subscribe to our podcast or leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts. Also, you can support us monetarily in 2 easy ways. You can pledge $1 per episode or more through Patreon. That's patreon.com/EA podcast. Or you can leave a lump sum donation through PayPal at our website, everyone'sagnostic.com. The smallest contribution is greatly appreciated. Our opening monologue is an excerpt from a YouTube by Hank Green titled Towering Mountain of Ignorance. The music behind it is Never Know by Jack Johnson. The segue music on this episode was created by the Barry Orchestra, my good friend Stephen Barry, found at barryorchestra.bandcamp.com. Links to Corinna's blog site, the Amazon site for her book, and the publisher site for her book are in the show notes. And before I say my tagline, let me just say that when I say be a yes-sayer to what is, I'm only talking about those things of which you have no control. So when it comes to that for which you have no control, be a yes-sayer.
Can you hear me?
Hello.
Can you hear?
Yes.
Hello.
Hello.
Well,
How
I
are
don't
you?
see. Okay. Hi.
Hi, Corinna. Is it Corinna?
It's Corinna,
Corinna.
like ballerina.
Got
It's
it.
spelled wrong.
Okay.
My parents were maybe smoking a little too much pot
Oh, okay. Sure.
when they named me. Oh, there you are. I see somebody. Hi, Cass. There you guys are. Okay. I read about you guys.
Oh.
Yeah. So I know you. I know you.
So are you in Washington then, Corinna?
Yes, I am in Washington State,
Washington State.
in a tiny little town called Pullman,
Mm-hmm.
which is where Washington State University is, and it's very close to Idaho.
Oh, okay.
It's on that side
Okay, gotcha. Very
of
good.
the Cascades. Yeah.
Yeah, super. Well,
So
yes.
remind me, Corinna, how
Yes.
did your publicist contact me, or is that how we met?
Yes, that's right. My publicist is my really good friend.
Okay, cool.
And we decided to send out another little round of, I guess you were on, maybe it was BuzzFeed, a list of, your podcast had made a list of, spiritually based kind of shows.
Okay.
And then my other publicist sent you a book, hopefully. Did you
Yeah.
get it?
Yes.
Yeah, we did.
Okay. Okay.
So let's get your background, like your childhood faith, if you had any. What's the context in which you were, religious context in which you were raised?
With nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Both my parents had sort of stopped going to church. My father was raised kind of Greek Orthodox, though his father was like Mr. Science Atheist, But his mother, my grandmother, was still really into the Greek church. He was like a choir boy, but he was a very rebellious hippie sort and stopped going and didn't ever really believe, starting pretty early. And my mother was raised like sort of Baptist a little bit, but it was also a little bit non-denominational. It was very like Bible based, kind of small country little church. And I went there a couple of times with my grandparents on my mom's side. So I did have a taste of what a church was. And in fact, taking the communion I had a literal taste because I loved that idea.
Yeah, they're delicious too.
Oh, delicious.
Yeah,
well, at this
exactly.
small church, it was sort of kind of somebody made it, it was like a piece, it was so it was a hunk of something not so bad.
Yeah.
But by the time I was born and raised, they were just these sort of free thinking hippie sorts, very artistic. And I was raised not going to church, not talking about God, nothing.
Yeah.
I mean, God was not something that we talked about.
Right.
And what town did you, like in the town that you grew up in, was it in Washington State?
No, I was born in Austin, Texas.
Okay.
And that's where my mother lives. And then when I was about 13, I moved to Los Angeles, which is where my father had moved once my parents split up.
Okay.
And so I was a teenager in Los Angeles.
Okay. So Austin, even though it's in Texas in the South, is not a Christian hegemonic town.
Yeah.
And neither is Los Angeles. So not only was it not in your home, it wasn't in your culture as much as it is, like, say, here in the South.
Yeah. So you're a heathen, pretty much.
Pretty much.
And, okay.
Yes, I'm a zero. I'm a nun.
Yeah.
That's right.
And that's why my book is called A Nun's Story.
Yeah.
NONES. And that's what statisticians are calling people who on surveys, when they ask, what is your religious affiliation, they circle none.
Yeah.
And that's you.
And that's me.
So
and that's a huge growing segment of the population.
That's right. You're an exemplar of the nuns that are out there right now.
That's right.
Well, before we move on from your family, do you have any siblings?
I have a very postmodern sort of family situation. I have a half brother who is 16 years younger than me. Mm-hmm. And I have a stepsister on my mom's side who is about 10 years younger than me. So really, I was only with a sibling in the house for a few years.
Yeah.
And he was a baby.
Yeah. Do you know if either of them have turned out religious?
They are not.
Okay. So there's just literally no religious influence. And was it in this context that you got curious and saying, well, maybe I'm missing out? There's a lot of religions in the world and millions and billions of people are religious, and I didn't get exposed to much of it, and maybe I'm missing out.
That is exactly what started me on the journey that resulted in my book.
Okay.
It was a curiosity. It was also, I was sort of prone to anxiety starting at a young age and not really having any context for sort of these bigger questions.
Like, why am I here? And that's the stuff. What's the point of life and those kind of things?
Yes. And where do you go? And what's it all mean? And yeah, exactly.
Okay. As a nun, and as a NONE nun, I mean, and a heathen and what have you, how can you be good? How is it possible to be a good person?
Right. Well, that's a excellent question. I think there's been enough sort of teachings that have made it into secular society. I knew the golden rule. I didn't know that it was associated with Jesus. But I knew starting very, very early and was taught, to treat people the way that I wanted to be treated and that everyone was equal. Yeah.
Even that notion goes back to Zoroastrianism and stuff. I mean, it's in all religions, really, this notion of don't do to them what you don't want done to you.
Exactly.
So,
It's kind of just, it's like part of hopefully growing up and being a human with other humans living around you. My father taught me kindness to animals, and he was always very kind to animals. So my parents were both just kind. Mm-hmm. It's not like I was starting at nothing. There was like generations of people who had probably absorbed some of the more sort of kind-oriented teachings of religion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So how old are you now?
I am 47.
How old were you when you started on this journey of curiosity of religion?
I was in my the official journey began sort of in my late 30s.
Uh-huh. Well, did you have any college education?
I did. I went to UC Berkeley. For undergrad. I went to the University of Texas at Austin for my master's degree. And then I have another master's degree from Johns Hopkins.
Wow, that's cool.
In writing. So I am super duper educated, I guess you would say.
So at what point, I mean, you're talking about your anxiety, and maybe there was an existential crisis and you were wanting to answer these big questions. And was this stirred up by your college experience, or, what do you think is the root of your anxiety?
Yeah, like a trigger or something.
Fear. Mm-hmm. I think it boils down to two things that are both fear-oriented. One is, death.
Sure.
So I was always really in touch with my mortality.
Mm-hmm.
I was afraid of that. Didn't know what that meant, didn't like it. And that scared me. Then the journey began when I started, exploring religions. I realized that another source of my fear was the enormous sense of responsibility for having made it here to Earth. Just the odds.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just the evolution and the generations and, and here I like, whoa, you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure.
And like, what am I going to do with my life that's going to have earned this amazing privilege? And I think there was sort of like these bookends of fear, like, am I going to do enough? Am I going to be enough? And then why the heck am I going to be taken out? And so but I couldn't have put words to that at the time. I just knew suddenly I had this dread. It resulted in a panic attack.
Right.
Oh.
And it took me a really long time to be able to understand exactly where that fear was coming from that caused that sort of gut reaction.
Have you had any experience with a therapist?
I have.
So
with many.
Yeah. Are you taking
Me too.
Are you taking anything for your anxiety?
I do.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. What do you take?
I take it's a fluoxetine, which is basically, Prozac.
Oh, Prozac.
I'm on a fairly small dosage. Yeah.
Yeah, I was on Prozac for a while. Oh boy,
it works for me.
That could really too much can make you like everything's fine. You can you can kind of turn into somewhat of a zombie, but it's fine. These feelings well up inside you.
Yes.
And I think there's nothing. I mean, absolutely. If you've got sugar diabetes, you'd be on pills. Or
there's
something.
no shame in it.
No, absolutely not.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
Well,
Right.
The thing that I think is fascinating here is that almost like a laboratory example here, we have a person that raised in America somehow escaped the Christian hegemony. Mm-hmm. And I think we can say, most people would argue and agree that religion was formed or forged out of the fires of existential anxiety. Why are we here? What's the meaning of life?
Fear.
And death anxiety.
Death. Mm-hmm.
And so here, I guess being raised in Oklahoma, being raised Christian, Christianity is the water that I was swimming in. I mean, like, it's literally the environment. And I've often fantasized. I mean, I really wish that I was raised secular, and I resent, sometimes my upbringing, and I've kind of wondered what would it have been like, to literally, my kids were raised as preachers' kids. Now they're raised as secular, but first 39 years of my life, Corinna, I was a pastor. And so I'm looking envious at the grass is greener and over on the other side. And here you are, a living, walking, talking example.
Look at you.
And yet,
yeah,
she's curious and fearful and anxious. And where does she go? To religion.
Yep.
So talk about the journey.
Among other places. Yeah.
You dabbled, you spent some time in the 4 major world religions. Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and Islam. Mm-hmm. And, Bob and I both skimmed the book, and we know that you were able to glean from each one something beautiful, something valuable, almost like a smorgasbord. You were able to pick and choose the things for which you would adopt into your real life, right?
That's right. That's right.
So maybe take us through maybe an example from each one.
I'd like to know about the Christianity. Well, all of them, actually.
Sure.
Because, there's a lot of toxic stuff in Christianity. And you're able to move about that and find the good stuff, apparently.
Yes. Well, I mean, really, it boils down to Jesus.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Pretty good guy.
Yeah. And the things that he did as an example for us, what really spoke to me as somebody who's, been rooted in the secular world was this demonstration of dying Basically, what he says as he's dying and going into it is, be not afraid.
Yeah, one of the things he says, that's for sure. One of the Gospels,
Actually,
anyway.
I don't know that he ever says it. What
does he say? Be not afraid somewhere. Maybe he doesn't say it on the cross.
No, not. But just sort of around the time, and then there's sort of around the time that he's dying. It's like one of his main messages to his friends who are watching him die. Is basically, don't be afraid. Worry about this part of it. Your mission is to be joyful and to love one another. Yeah, this bravery, like I felt like it was just such a, here was this guy who was young, supposedly in his 30s, and he is sharing, and we relive it, in Christianity every year, but he is sharing this really intimate moment, his death, with not only the people in front of him, but presumably with the world, and the story of his death, and really the rest of us, we don't really have a real strong understanding of dying or an experience of it, necessarily. I mean, maybe if our grandparents die, or maybe we'll have a parent who dies, but this sort of communal mourning and understanding of somebody who shared their death in a public way like that, I think is really interesting and important.
I'm a bit confused about your experience with Jesus on the cross, because he said, my God, why have you forsaken me? So it wasn't necessarily a pleasant experience for him.
Well, one of I don't know if that's Mark or Luke, whoever says that one, but if you read the different Gospels, he says different things in different Gospels. Yeah. So, but yes, there is that don't be afraid thing. I don't exactly know where it is, but I know it's in there. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing to take from Jesus. So the stuff that you take is
I'm not saying he loved his death. I know there was a lot. I mean, he struggled. He certainly struggled, especially the night before, and when his friends fell asleep, and he's like, "What the heck, guys? Here I am. I'm going to, basically going into my death." And he's disappointed and he struggles, but I think that's also really important.
Right. Yeah.
But in the end, the overall message, to me at least, was to his friends: don't worry about this part. Don't obsess about this part.
Well, it's mostly because he was proposing that they're going to live forever, that this is not the end. Oh, death, where is thou sting?
Yeah, yeah.
So where have you landed on the afterlife, as far as, do you believe that there's an afterlife?
Well, I do. I don't think that it's necessarily, a place where I'm going to rematerialize as myself. You know what I mean? But I do think it's sort of beyond our comprehension, and has a lot to do with how we live our lives here and today, and what we leave behind. I don't know. It's mysterious to me, but I do think once you've lived, you are forever.
Yeah, your energy is, for sure. I mean, energy is eternal.
Yeah.
And
interesting.
The composition of your body.
So you don't take any theological or supernatural stuff from this, then, do you? From Christianity or any of them? I'm just wondering. I mean, these are like the things you're saying make me think, well, that's a good place to live. Don't be afraid. That's a good thing. And, all the stuff you mentioned. But in terms of theology or any of the supernatural stuff, did you get something from that as well? Or yeah.
I took it to be metaphor, because nobody knows.
Yeah. So exactly you didn't take hell as an actual place. You didn't take, like you say, heaven as an actual, like a place. A physical place that you go to up in the clouds somewhere, which my dad would believe, and God has a big white beard, that kind of stuff. It wasn't, no. Okay.
I mean, but I understand also that God is really hard to talk about, and so is heaven. And so if that helps people in envisioning it in their imaginations, I don't mind talking about it like that, because I know that makes it more concrete, and not everybody is going to be this super abstract thinker, and be comfortable with that. Like, people envision things in a way in which they can.
Yeah.
And to be able to talk about things. So in a way, going through this made me aware of the different ways we can talk about the same things, and that we can still talk about them. You know what I mean? That it doesn't, like, if somebody wants to talk about heaven as an actual place, I'm okay with that.
Yeah, well, part of what you're able to do, and I do want to go back and get the specifics, but part of what you did, coming from a place of completely secular upbringing, is picked up the vernacular and be able to speak that language, be able to understand, get inside the head of these people that believe this certain, in this case, Christianity. So my question is that did you join a church, and if so, how long were you there? I mean, what type of immersion are we talking about?
I spent 2 years going to every single church within about a 20-mile radius of my home. I started with Lutheran because I wanted to start with the Protestant Reformation. I was educating myself along the way. So then I went to like sort of more of a Calvin based, and then I worked my way into sort of American Christian Science, Jehovah Witness, all the way to sort of Bible based, rock and roll even. I did, you name it. I did it all. I went to some churches more than once. I really wanted to just worship with people, to see what it was, to understand where each variation of faith came from, and what it sort of, what made it different. Because I think as somebody who is secular, people say, well, just start going to church or just start going to synagogue or whatever. And I'm like, well, I don't know the difference between these, and so I wanted to understand the differences, what they had in common. And so that's what I kind of map out in my book, is that journey.
Okay. So you would go to, like you said, the Lutheran church, which is pretty staid, pretty almost Catholic. I mean, they're very, they put the robes on and what have you. But then there's like Pentecostalism and the Pentecostal churches where people are, like you say, rocking and rolling and speaking in tongues and all that stuff. Did you see any of that?
What's funny is that it was very subtle. I thought it would be like, and I'm sure some variations of it are, where it's like people literally rolling in the aisles, but and big sort of flamboyant displays. But the ones that I saw were much more sort of subdued. And so I almost didn't realize it was happening. So like there would be everybody kind of going, hallelujah, blah, 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 blah. And then I think that they were going into tongues. Doing the tongues. But to me, it just sort of sounded like water over rocks. You know what I mean? It was just like, and so I did witness it. I didn't have the sort of like, oh, this is a complete freak show moment,
So did you ever attend a church where, like, say, the praise and worship, modern music lasted maybe 30 minutes? I mean, like where people are raising hands and things?
Oh, yeah.
So as an experiment in your own journey, that's what you're doing. You're trying to, and I think most believers, we could say, they don't believe because of the doctrine. They believe because of the experience. Yeah. Not only of the community, but the goosebumps, the personal feeling of God loves me and has a plan for my life. And you can't understand that unless you give it a whirl yourself, like you test drive that car. And so when you're in that context, did you like, for example, try raising your hands?
Only if I was told to by the preacher.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like sometimes they're like, okay, raise your hands. This is the part where we raise our hands.
Yeah.
And I gave it a whirl, but I would say that when it was spontaneous, people just raising their hands, which definitely happened.
Sure.
I wouldn't necessarily raise my hands in that context. However, there is this enthusiasm, this sort of group sort of elation
Yeah.
that is definitely contagious.
Yeah.
Like I didn't have to raise my hands to get that feeling.
To get the vibe. Yeah. Yeah.
You know, it's interesting that you use the word enthusiasm because in the, I think it's Greek or Latin or something, but in theos
Yes.
is God within.
Yes.
And so the reason that the word even came up was just like people witnessed these people that were filled with the Holy Spirit, and they called it in theos, and now we know it as enthusiasm.
Yeah.
So it is a contagious thing. I'm kind of glad that you had that experience, because as a secularist or even an objective, natural, reasonable thinker, you're like, hey, there's something going on here. Now, we might not ascribe it to supernaturalism or Holy Spirit, but music is powerful. Community is powerful. Peer pressure is powerful. And you get caught up in the swell of this worship.
You guys do.
Yeah.
I sit and puzzle over it.
No, Bob, you would have to.
I can't understand it.
Well, you've never sat in this type of service then, man. 'Cause
No.
it's powerful.
Because I would sit and think, this is nuts. What's going on here? Putting your hands up like what do you call those things? Dishes? Satellite dishes.
Dish.
You're trying to pick up the vibe, pick up the...
You really are.
Yes.
That's part of what you're doing.
You're tuning in. You're tuning in to the
tuning into nothing.
The frequency of God.
I'm sorry. It never stuck to me. I can't do it. I can't figure it out.
Yeah. Well, you know what? Some people, their joy is maybe not expressed that way.
Well,
in which case, something else is for you.
I think that there's a degree in which somebody's appetite has a lot to do with it. So, if somebody is desperate, and I think the reason you even started on this journey, Corinna, was that there was this anxiety around something, and I've got to find out for myself. But I'm just saying that there are people in those churches, and I'm saying, there's a degree of credulity, there's a degree of gullibility, and it has to do with, I really need for this to be true. I need for there to be a God. I need him to love me unconditionally. Right. I need to know that my life has meaning within the context of someone else's grand master plan. And you didn't have that. So your appetite was such that you're
now I've had a dark night of the soul, don't get me wrong. I mean, I've been pretty down. But I've never thought about, I'll go to church and fix it. I mean, I thought about going to a doctor, to get some help. But that's just me, though. Yeah. So clearly it's just me. I'm sorry, I'm in left field here. No. But I'm learning. No. I'm learning. So that's what happened with Christianity, huh?
Yes. I mean, and at the same time that I was like observing these people and thinking, I could never really necessarily be a actual part of this exuberance. Even in that moment, I could feel the exuberance. And I remember like leaving one Pentecostal church and really feeling like on a high, really.
Sure. Oh, yeah. Well, this is the thing, guys, is that Christianity isn't like the most popular religion in the world because it's completely bunk and void of power and emotions and experience. I guarantee you every Sunday morning, the churches across this country are filled with people that literally go and get their battery charged. And it's not a delusion on their part. They actually do feel better when they leave. They're ready to take on Monday in the next week because of some motivational speech, some encounter with God. And experientially, whether it's a placebo, which we obviously can say that it is, it fucking works. And if it didn't, we wouldn't have a church on every corner. So I'm just saying, but I'm glad you jumped in there and tested the waters. Yeah. So what about Judaism?
Well, Judaism is interesting because I actually, when I was in Los Angeles being a teenager, I went to a predominantly Jewish junior high and high school. Okay. So I went from Texas, where there aren't so many Jews, to living in LA, where there were a lot of Jews, at least where I lived. And so a lot of my friends were Jewish, but they were Jewish in a way that was very subtle. You know what I mean? They weren't necessarily Orthodox Jews.
Yeah, right.
They were very liberal, sort of more like Hollywood Jews. And
they were
and
Jew-ish.
They were Jewish. But yet they were Jewish.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? I think in the same way that I had Christianity sort of in my DNA,
right.
they had Judaism in their DNA.
Yeah.
And so one of the things, I was this secular kid. I had a lot of fear. I had a lot of anxiety. And they had this sort of existential security in a way that I did not. And I was drawn to them to this day. My high school, junior high school friends are still some of my best friends. And I think this idea of being chosen, I think the rest of people who aren't Jewish have sort of a misinterpretation of what that means.
Yeah.
Because I think people think it means, well, I'm better than all of you.
Yeah.
I've been chosen by God
Mm-hmm.
and you haven't. But really, it was an invention for all people because Adam and Eve come from, everybody comes from that one source,
Mm-hmm.
that it was, you have been chosen to be here.
Mm-hmm.
You have been chosen to be here on earth, and you don't need to freak out about it. Like, are you going to do enough? Are you going to be enough? Are you going to, why? There's like sort of like this, I don't know, security in.
Yeah, I get it.
Well, they're anchored.
Yeah.
They're connected and they are rooted, as opposed to being like a satellite floating in space, or having no grounding. Most of us probably, as far as the human race, we feel like expats. But the Jews, and if you think about it, I mean, every religion that we're talking about here, besides Buddhism, is an Abrahamic religion. So from the get-go, these people have some grounding,
right? And
there is a sense of belonging. One of the highest needs of every human being is the sense, where do I belong, and and to whom do I belong? Family. And if in this case religion or whatever, it's a very strong thing.
See, and because I'm who I am. I know that Yahweh was an angry God, was a war God, and I know that 5,000 years ago or whatever it's been, being part of the chosen people had nothing to do with everybody. It had to do with these guys, these Arab sandal-wearing folks out in the desert.
Semites.
Yeah, the Semites, exactly. But that doesn't matter to Corinna. When she, really, I'm serious.
Yeah, it's true.
You go there and you find something to fill that hole inside you about the anxiety and am I enough? And Judaism gives you this notion of, well, yes, everybody gets to play. Everybody's fine. We can do it. That type of stuff.
But you're saying that's an evolved version.
That's an evolved version
of Judaism.
I think it's a version that is modern day.
Sure.
Yeah. Well, and if that's what it means, I like it.
Yeah.
These are the lessons I got from this.
Yeah. Right. Gotcha. Yeah.
What about a lot of times, the Christianity I was exposed to, because it's a Abrahamic religion, and it's rooted in Judaism, basically the Old Testament.
Sure.
There's a lot of Christians who have adopted the Jewish calendar, the festivals, the feasts, maybe even rites of passage like bar mitzvah and
why not?
bat mitzvah.
I'm ready for a party anytime.
Sure,
let's go.
So did you find that? Did you find value in the calendar or in the festivals?
Yeah, I did. I mean, I feel like Christianity, a lot of the sort of holidays are centered around going into winter. And coming out of winter, you know what I mean? And to me, this whole journey changed my relationship to winter. I live really far north in the United States, and our days in the winter get very short.
Right.
it's like nighttime at 4:00 in the afternoon.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And I suddenly understood why people would need religion in the winter and why it would have these religious sort of markings during the holidays, and this idea of candles, Hanukkah candles,
right?
Light, because it gets kind of bleak.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sure.
I think of this recurring line in Game of Thrones: "Winter is coming."
Winter is coming, and winter comes. Winter comes. I'm heading into it now, or I'm in it pretty much. And I'm like, the lessons of religion help me a lot.
Yeah,
sure.
Because some of my melancholia was when I moved here. I was used to California. I was used to Texas, where there's a lot of sunshine, and I was like, oh, this is like how a whole other batch of people live.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
And so the winter, this idea of death, of Christmas, of celebrating rebirth, of like, you know what I mean? Like going into the holidays, and there's a lot of focus on death, but then also a brightness.
Yeah.
And the tree with the lights and the candles in the window and the Hanukkah candles. Like that is like realistic sort of survival mechanisms.
Sure. Yeah. In a world lit only by fire, how important it is.
Yeah.
I mean, in that type of darkness. Yeah. Yeah. You're right. Absolutely. I see that.
And then also the spring rituals. You know what I mean? The rebirth, the Jesus is rising.
Yeah.
These, and Passover. These are really crucial markings of a calendar year.
Yeah.
That really give life meaning when it can be very bleak.
I think we're talking about the importance of hope in the human experience, and that is we're going through this tunnel. It's dark, it's scary, and if we don't have some kind of idea or notion on our minds that this too shall pass, that there's an end coming to this pain and darkness and this whatever dry, scary lull time.
Right.
Hope deferred makes the heart sick, the Bible says. And if you don't have hope, then you can get overwhelmed with the current state. If you don't have some kind of lifeline, light at the end of the tunnel, it's hard.
Yeah, but I have such trouble with like Passover.
Oh, well, Passover sucks.
Yeah, I mean, just that whole notion of blood, and you got the angel comes and it's going to kill the kids. Come on.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I know that today it doesn't mean that. It means something different today as far as a holiday. Yeah. But it thousands or millions or whatever, thousands of babies or people died that day. So
or so.
Well, it was interesting because I did Passover with a group of Hasidic Jews.
Oh my.
And what I hadn't anticipated was the amount of sort of mourning involved for the people who did die. So there's this part of the ritual where you drop, for every plague that struck the Egyptians, you drop out a little drop of wine from your glass onto a plate. Oh. And it's meant to sort of symbolize tears, that this had to happen in order to end slavery, basically, of the people for whom Judaism, is important. Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, to me, it made sense to me.
Okay. So it's a grieving process as well.
It's a grieving process. It's a celebration of freedom. See, I applied it universally.
Yeah.
And also kind of metaphorically.
Yeah.
So it was, to me, it was a kind of a beautiful celebration. There was a joy, the bitter tears, the various things that you eat symbolizing tears and mortar that was the, enslavement and needing to have to build whatever they were building, maybe the pyramids. So there was a joyousness to it, but it also felt like spring. To me, it encapsulated that sort of like joy and hope of like, okay, another year, spring is coming.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think about this, and I've never thought about this actually, but I'm thinking about it now, and that is, what if time was linear and not circular? Like literally, just instead of coming back around every 365 days to whatever season, whatever holidays, we were just,
just keep going,
and there's no consistency. We never even know what season it's going to be next.
Oh,
well, you know what that is?
What?
Los Angeles. You know what I mean? No, seriously,
It
you
never
guys,
changes.
I'm not joking.
Forever summer.
So,
Well, at least in the Los Angeles area.
There's it's hard to find rhythm there.
It is. No, and this is why this is my own personal theory,
Mm-hmm.
but this is why plastic surgery and youth looking young forever is such a
Big deal.
enormous gripping concept in LA, because they aren't experiencing time like the rest of us necessarily, and it is linear, and, it's a very secular city. It's a city that is very youth obsessed. And I have a feeling it really ties to that.
That's interesting. And what I felt like I was about to fill in the word there was God-forsaken. And in a way, this is what is kind of cool about Corinna's journey, is that you can be atheist. You can be completely like non-supernatural. Mm-hmm. And yet you don't want that desolate place of being literally godless and God-forsaken and linear. Like, you want these cycles, you want these patterns, you want this meaning-making, storytelling, pattern-seeking environment in order to feel anchored to something. And this is the existential crisis solution. So I just think it's fascinating that whatever inkling inside not only just Corinna, but all humans is saying, I don't believe this shit, but I'm going to partake.
It's like Corinna has embraced the ritual, the ritual of Judaism, because it's possible to be an atheist and to be a Jew, to be a Jew and to embrace the rituals of Judaism.
Yeah.
So.
Yes. And one thing that Judaism does that I really appreciated was they have these simple sort of phrases that they say when you see something beautiful, or when you wake up in the morning, you say, basically, thank you, God. And then if when you're about to eat some bread, you say, again, you pause, you say, thank you for this bread. And when I first was introduced to these sort of phrases that pepper the day for Jews, for Orthodox Jews or Jews that are
practicing,
very religious, I was like, oh, they're saying these mysterious phrases because a lot of times they're in another language, and then I realized, oh, this is just simple moment to pause and say thank you.
Yeah,
right. It's gratitude.
It's gratitude. Yeah,
right. A mark of maturity is a sense of gratitude,
and it's also a returning to the present moment.
Mm-hmm. You know what that is in my life right now? Is toasting.
Oh yeah,
yeah, and sometimes I'll even say l'chaim.
To life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what? That is exactly what it is. It's a toast. You wake up in the morning and you give a little toast to life, and I like the fact that that's built in.
You know what?
Day.
That's kind of what the secular version of that is. Happy hour. No, I'm serious. After work, look, you get off work, and you stop by the bar, and it's cheers where everybody knows your name, and you clink glasses, and that's the cycle. That's a rhythm in a secular life.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
I can be religious and go to happy hour. That's what I like. Why not?
That's our religion. So Buddhism. Talk about your experience with Buddhism. I suppose you practice some meditation, and if so, did it transfer over into your regular life? Are you a meditator?
It's interesting. I do meditate, not necessarily officially every day. But, I live a very kind of quiet life up here. It's a small town. So, and I write, that's what I do.
So you're like a monk.
Right, exactly. There's a lot of meditation built into my day. What's really interesting is the fact that California in the United States is kind of a hotbed of Buddhism.
Mm-hmm.
And Buddhism doesn't have
A
necessarily, doesn't have like a God is in the way that we think of the Abrahamic God,
Mm-hmm.
but there is a thing that connects us all,
Mm-hmm.
and that connects all living things, which to me feels a lot like what God is
Mm-hmm.
in my mind. So people think that Buddhism doesn't have a God, but it does have a God-like.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a pantheistic, or panentheism. I mean, that
Yeah.
that the collective soul of all interconnected things.
Atman or something.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then there's some versions of Buddhism that begin to sort of morph into a little bit of a Christian sort of box. I think once Jesus got to be known in the world, there were some Buddhist monks who began to sort of think of Buddhism in Christian, a little bit in those terms.
Westernized,
and Buddha
yeah.
became sort of more of a savior. But the meditative, the sort of Zen Buddhism, I think it spoke to Californians in particular because it doesn't necessarily have these sort of traditions in a year,
Mm-hmm.
these sort of holidays. It's not really based in the cycle of a year necessarily, but it is based in returning to the present moment,
Mm-hmm.
always returning to the present moment.
Right.
And noticing your life and being alive and, being grateful and thankful and just being present.
Mm-hmm.
That was a great journey to take. I did it where I went to undergrad, which was at Berkeley. There are lots of various Buddhist sort of temples and churches around Berkeley and Oakland. So I returned there and I explored Buddhism there.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the places where I was the least present was when I was an undergrad. You know what I mean? It's like I was
Yes.
just sort of phoning it in, working, not noticing, not being grateful. So it was interesting to go rewrite history in a funny way and to do it better in that space. But I also think that sort of returning to the present moment is also captured by Christianity and Judaism and Islam.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's, when you worship and you say your morning cheers, in Judaism, you are returning to the present moment. And do a toast, you are returning to the present moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So to me, to be able to see that and understand that very clearly with exploring Buddhism was very enlightening and kind of a great lesson to have.
Yeah, and so just even in this conversation, I'm seeing a contrast here, and that is in Christianity and Judaism, we've already talked about how there's these calendar events that create a rhythm that helps the human soul kind of leapfrog through time from festival to festival or from whatever, so that in this dark time we have hope of something coming. Here in Buddhism, literally one of the phrases of Buddhism is non-attachment to outcome.
Right.
And so, as opposed to Christianity and Judaism setting you up to have hope, like you're literally attached to an outcome, like you're literally linked to that future event, and that's helping pull you into the future.
Right.
Zen Buddhism is saying, nope,
Yeah.
no attachment to the future, to the past. It's just the now moment. That's an interesting contrast.
Yeah. Also, Corinna, were you taken, or did you buy into this whole karmic thing, the thing about karma? What goes around comes around, and
Not in a real sort of concrete, immediate way, but I do think in the same way that people talk about heaven or the afterlife, there is something truthful in the idea of karma. I do think, there's collective karma.
Mm-hmm.
You can see it in sort of these broad social issues like racism. Slavery and racism, what's happening now politically.
Right. The chickens come home to roost, as they say.
Yeah, I do think that that there is something to karma. I don't necessarily think it's going to be immediate and like super technical. You know what I mean? It's not like, but there is something to it. Yes, I do think of that. Yeah.
Well, it makes you feel good anyway, because those damn people, those damn senators, that damn Trump, those kind of things. He'll get his. Makes you feel good.
Well, yeah, but you can look at it a different way, and which is that we are all responsible.
Yeah.
For what's happening. I do think that it's not really something to put it off on somebody else. Karma is taking responsibility.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very Jewish notion. That idea, like, what have I done in this scenario that made it worse, and how can I fix that? That's a Jewish concept. That's a good idea. I like that idea.
Yeah,
because we're all part of it. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And you can't really like slough it off onto somebody else.
Yeah.
Like you really have to say, well, this is like, if I'm part of this country and these people, what is my contribution to what's going on? And you think of it like that.
Yeah. Well, this is one of the most toxic things about Christianity, because Christianity at its core is about fluffing it off to someone else. It's scapegoating. It's put your sins on Jesus and I'm forgiven. So I think the application of karma, the application of responsibility is a good addition to Christianity.
It's
because
kind of adult.
Well,
adult
Christians are famous for not caring about the ecology.
Yeah.
Because God's in control, and he's going to get a new heaven and a new earth. So we're not responsible for being stewards of the earth. That's a very strong thing in Christianity.
Yeah. John Kennedy said, "Here on earth, God's work must truly be our own."
There you go.
Yeah. Well, anyway.
So let's move to Islam. And I know that one of the things that was meaningful about your excursion into Islam is that you made friends with a particular woman that ends up being a big part of the story.
Yeah. Tell us about that.
Khadijah. Yeah. So she was in this town that I live in. I was looking for somebody to teach me how to do the prayers in Islam, because you need to be able to kind of understand. They're kind of, I think of them as sort of a flash mob. Like it's kind of,
Yeah. That's great.
You collectively do these movements and say words. And in order to be able to join in, you at least have to have a sort of a basic understanding. So I found her. We found each other after lots of people flaked out on me. And she began to sort of to tutor me so that I could then do this journey even in the first place.
Did you get the prayer rug and the whole thing? Did you do that?
I did. I got a prayer rug. I wore hijab. I went into the place where I decided to do the bulk of my Islam exploration was actually in Dallas, Texas. And Dallas to me is a very materialistic kind of a city, or at least that's how I thought of it. It's segregated. It has a lot of these sort of basic urban issues, and it's very American, and like, people drive really fancy cars are very important. Diamonds and
oil money. I get it.
Yeah, makeup.
Yeah.
So like Islam to me seemed like the opposite of those things. Talk about, big hair in Texas. Now you have no hair because you're wearing hijab. You know what I mean? It's hidden. Yeah. So like, I don't know. It's an interesting place to explore Islam. Also, it's one of the fastest growing Muslim populations in the United States. So I wanted to be prepared, and so Khadijah, so I would go over to her house. We would meet for an hour at a time or about, and just sort of say these phrases. She would go over it. And she was such a warm, loving person that we just, I don't know, we connected on kind of a soul level, a heart level. It turns out we were the exact same age. And there was a language barrier to some extent. She is now in Kansas, and she has gotten a lot better at English. She's the one who's actually gone to school. Back then, it was her husband who was getting his master's. She's able to be here on a student visa from Libya. I don't know. We just loved each other instantly. I felt like.
So you picked up this practice of praying 5 times a day.
Yes, I did. I knew how to do it. I didn't necessarily always do it on time, but I learned the rules of it.
What are the times?
There are 5
Vespers.
times, and it's kind of like morning. And it's a window. It's kind of like all day, but you have a window. So you have like a couple of hours to do the morning one, and then you have a couple of hours to do like the later morning one, and you know what I mean. It's sort of like the time that you would think.
It really is like Christian Vespers. It really is. I don't know if there's five Christian Vespers, but there's, it goes all day long. And there's a nighttime one and a midday one and a morning one and those kind of things.
So do you practice that now?
What's funny is when I am feeling stressed out, overwhelmed, or angry, at the world, one of the most soothing things for me to do is to come to my knees, to put my forehead on the ground, and to surrender. And in yoga, this is called child's pose. And to me, it grounds me. It sort of resets my engines.
Right.
I don't say the right words, and I don't do it at the right time anymore. But the lesson, the gist, I get it. And so in that way, I do incorporate it into my life.
Yeah,
sure.
Well, this is what I think is interesting, is because you're able to extract a little bit from each. Now, you probably don't believe that Allah is the only and one true God and Muhammad is his prophet. So you're probably not considered officially a Muslim, right?
Well, but see, here's how I understand that. Allah is God. It's monotheism.
Right.
It's the same one God of the Abrahamic religions. And Muhammad was a prophet in the same way that Jesus was a prophet, in the same way that other people are prophets that come bearing that message, who, to me, Islam was Christianity for a new group of people on the planet. It's very similar. The Quran is very similar to the Bible. It tells a lot of the same stories. So I don't really, from my perspective, I'm like, why are these people fighting? I mean, I know it's socio-political, a lot of politics involved, a lot of history, karma, talk about karma in the Middle East that has led to these sorts of fighting. Or thinking of enemies, thinking of one side thinking the other side is an enemy.
Sure.
But to me, they're so very similar. They say the same thing. I guess if you're like really, really dead set on it has to be Jesus, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
Who was
fundamentalism, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, the fundamentalists. So I do believe Allah is the one God because I like the idea of monotheism, that we're all connected. And monotheism to me is we all derive from one source. When you have multiple gods, and I think that this is why monotheism replaced the multiple gods idea, is because it makes us all connected. And that's fundamental, to just understanding and loving each other. And so Allah is the one true God. Muhammad was his prophet. I don't have a problem with that.
That's interesting. So what you do is you just drain the theology from these things. You
The doctrine.
The doctrine, not
the
theology.
dogma.
Yeah, you drain all that from all these religions. And because if you read, there's a guy by the name of Stephen Prothero or something like that, who wrote a book called God is Not One, or something like that. And it's about, no, he would say to you, no, there are different gods, and here's the reason why. And the reason is all doctrinal and all these other, dogmatic reasons. But you don't care about that. Yeah,
I really don't.
I throw that away. And I just
throw that away.
Right. You just take from them, it's the stuff that Cass talks about is being playful and loose with religion, finding the good, throwing the bad stuff out of the way. Get that's over with. We don't do that anymore. And I think that's great. That's really the way to do it when you think of it.
Yeah, anything that tells me that I have enemies that I should hate and not, you know what I mean? I'm like, that's not religion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I get you.
And I don't need that.
Yeah.
There's enough of that within the human condition.
Mm-hmm.
To me, religion says, reach beyond that. Reach beyond that petty stuff. And it encourages us to be more than our separate egos.
Yeah.
Great.
Well,
I think that's great.
It's very amiable. And I think that Jesus tells this story about the wineskin, and there's, it's basically a hide of a lamb or goat or something. And there's this wonderful difference between a lambskin that has been used over and over again, and it's now just dry and brittle and crisp. It's no elasticity.
Right.
It's just gone. And I think what Corinna has established is just a very amiable and elastic and generous, pliable, flexible, so that when somebody says God bless America, she doesn't get her panties in a wad. Like it's just, she knows she can translate that back to herself and say, I know what they mean by that, and I know what I can hear when I hear that. So
exactly.
It's just a very generous way of engaging the real world. And the truth is the world is very religious. Humans are religious. They always will be religious. And we need examples like this that model for us how to navigate these religions that, let's be honest, a lot of wars have been started by these religions, a lot of bloodshed by these religions. And so if we're going to have religion, which we are, and if we're not going to self-sabotage with fundamentalism, then we need people like this that can navigate this and model it.
It's sort
for the
of
rest of us.
religion, like Corinna's religion is what it is. You know what I mean?
Well,
it's like your theology, your religion. It's you've come up with your own.
And I think everybody should be responsible for coming up with their understandings. Right. I get criticized, obviously, by religious people for, having this sort of like pick and choose.
Well, that's what they do too.
Yeah, cherry picking.
Yeah.
Cherry picking, right. And that it's not based in theology, and it's not this and it's not that. And I'm like, well, then what's the problem with that? I don't really like, the other option is for me not to have any of this information.
Yeah.
And I don't think that that's awesome either, So I guess the hard part is also that I can't really belong to anything because I'm a nun.
Yeah. Well, I think what I love about your conclusion in the book is that when you're forced to choose one religion, what you felt most, because you're like, okay, I could do this. I could be a Muslim. I could be a Christian. I could be a Buddhist. I could be a Jew, or at least a practicing Judaist. That's not a word, but but the thing that broke your heart at that moment on that precipice was I would have to do that at the exclusion of all these others. And it's almost like you want to be polyamorous with all these religions as opposed to monogamous.
Yeah, that's right. And I think that part of my role in this moment, and others like me, is that we have to clear the plate. We are clearing the plate. So there was atheism, which was a rejection. And now there's sort of like this exhalation, and putting things back on the plate, because we don't want to, atheism just smashed the plate.
Yeah, right.
And ran screaming from the room. And I feel like this generation, people like me, are saying, we don't feel angry in the same way that atheists do. We have had enough distance from this being something we had to do growing up or whatever it was that broke us from religion. And now we can kind of engage with what is positive.
Yeah.
And what works.
Right.
And so I see the next step being something that is a more holistic version of religion that is more loving. So I feel like this nun period is really a stage. in evolution, in the same way that, atheism was a stage. We're tiptoeing back a little bit. And so what's next? I don't know. But
well, let me ask you, because this lack of anger, and I'm sorry, but I just think of almost a place of privilege. Like that's afforded to you because you live in Oregon or whatever,
Washington.
But Washington.
Yeah.
So I guess whenever, let's just talk about women's rights in America, or reproductive rights, or abortion rights. When these things start to get all up in your business, and theocracy is infringing upon your freedoms as a woman or whatever, there might be some anger that kind of pushes back against these things. Because I think we're talking about the angry atheism is not just angry for no reason.
I think it's important.
Yeah.
I think it's I think that whole moment, was and it continues to be important in a lot of ways, but it also can sort of morph into its own fundamentalism.
Sure. Yeah.
Which I think is another thing I'm rejecting. But I'm not saying I don't get angry at fundamentalists who somehow think the Bible says something about my reproductive rights. Like what? Like I did not get that at all from the Bible. Like I went really into this and I spent 4 years exploring this, and I'm sorry, but I didn't see that anywhere.
Well, it's like you started out when you started talking about Christianity, was you said it's all about Jesus. Well, Jesus, the two very most important things to fundamental evangelicalism in America today is abortion and LGBT, neither of which Jesus said a fucking word.
That's right.
No,
but you can go back to the Old Testament, though. Go back to the Hebrew Bible. And
you can get the New
Testament.
You can get Paul.
Well, Paul too. That's true. But anyway, I'm sorry.
Well, do you live alone?
I live with my husband.
Okay. And your husband, where's he on the religious spectrum?
Well, he's a Jew.
Okay.
But he's a nun like me.
Mm-hmm.
But his DNA is Jewish.
Yeah. Where did you meet him?
We met in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
He was finishing up his PhD, and I was living there working.
Cool. Very cool.
What do you do for a living?
I'm a writer, and I teach at the university here, writing. And Phil is a professor here, too.
What's he teach?
He teaches in the architecture department.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. Great.
He's a historian.
What's your mom and dad think of your faith journey and the book?
Well, this is actually really funny, because when I was starting, I didn't know this would be a book. I was just doing this for myself initially. Mm-hmm. And they were like, well, what are you doing? Like they were worried for me.
Yeah, they make them nervous. I can understand that.
It made them nervous. And I think that's so funny that going to church and exploring religion, they're like, where did we go wrong?
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
I can understand that. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. And then as I got further along into it, they started to sort of get it. And then once the book was out, they were proud.
Yeah.
I know that my mother felt a little guilty because she has, friends who are religious, and she was sort of apologizing for having not given me any of that background. Like she started to feel a little guilty somehow. Mm-hmm. But I told her not to worry, that I was very happy being this. This is what I am.
Yeah. Religion can often lobotomize somebody, and I think that's what your parents might be afraid of. And now that the book's out, they're proud of you. Is that you went through the gauntlet of religions, and of which the extreme versions do want to rob you of your agency. Let's be honest. I mean, I know Christianity does because I lived it, and there are toxic versions of every one of those religions. There are fundamentalist versions of every one of those religions. Yes. And here you're going through that gauntlet, and the parents are nervous, and you came through, and with your agency and your IQ still intact.
Right. And you have a bag of tricks that you can use.
Now I have a bag of tricks.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So what do you and your husband do for fun?
We take walks.
Uh-huh. Does your town have like walking trails or greenways?
Oh, I bet.
Yes, we do. We have walking trails, which are less fun in the winter. It's beautiful here. There's a lot of sort of outdoorsy things to do. We also love road trips. We travel. We look at architecture. We go places and look at buildings. We write.
Yeah, that's great. How about TV shows? Are you guys into like Netflix or any of that?
Well, I'm a big TV show person. Phil is a little bit less. We have watched some things together, like we watched The Wire together. I just adore TV shows. My other sort of like secret
guilty pleasure.
Career, one of the things I would love to be in another life is to write for television.
Oh.
To me, shows are writing.
Yeah.
And so to look at the dialogue and the scenes and the storylines, it's really fun and educational. So I love it. And what are some of my favorite shows? Recently, I really love Master of None, which is funny.
Is that Aziz Ansari's show?
Yes.
Master of None. Yeah, it's great. That's a great show. Really well done. Yeah.
Really wonderful.
Yeah.
I love it. I love shows with women's voices, like Better Things, which is a show starring Pamela Alden. She's a female comedian. She was in Californication.
Okay.
And it's about being a single mom and her 3 daughters, and it's based on her life. It's just subtle and great and beautiful. It's not formulaic. It's just, I don't know. There's lots of great TV right now.
Yeah,
It's
there
amazing.
really is. They're saying this is the second golden age or something. Yeah.
Right.
And I think it's because, there's just so many more outlets, so many more platforms to be on. And
wonderful.
So a lot of people are getting work, which is a good thing. Absolutely.
Corinna, have you by chance seen this thing on Stars called Outlander?
No.
Okay, just checking.
Yeah.
Is it kind of based on the Bible?
No, not at all. It's like Scottish time travel. It's like a romance novel, but it's the main
Is
character.
it great?
The main character is a woman, and she's powerful, and so I thought maybe that was something. Yeah.
Oh, well, maybe I'll check it out.
Yeah, you have to have Stars. They're very exclusive. I mean, unlike sharing with Netflix and Hulu and stuff, it's very the only place
you got to have them.
Yeah, and it's $8 a month to do that. So.
Okay, I get it.
Well, what about libations? Do you and your husband drink anything or?
Yes, in fact, I just went out last night with a few girlfriends, went dancing.
Oh,
we have one little hot spot here. Yeah, I will drink. I love wine.
Yeah.
I love tequila.
Okay.
And I love margaritas. But I and beer. I actually really like beer, and my new favorite thing is sours.
Okay.
Have you heard
beer
of sours?
Beer sours?
Yeah. Well, they're
Yeah.
Yeah. Like they're called fruited sours.
Really? No.
Yeah,
I haven't,
and
I haven't tried them.
I mean, it's like beer,
Mm-hmm.
but it's made with, I guess, fruit. But it has sort of a tart, sour flavor. I don't know. I love it. Yeah, it's popular up here.
What's your husband drink?
He drinks beer mostly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you coming on, Corinna. I think it's a fascinating story, and I think the takeaway for my listeners, which are primarily ex-Christians and almost entirely traumatized by their experience. No, I'm not kidding. It's
No, I know. Get it. I know a lot of those people.
Yeah, we're in recovery. We're in recovery from religion because, unlike yourself, we drank the Kool-Aid, or we were forced to drink the Kool-Aid as children. We walked right into this trap, and we're spending the rest of our life trying to find our way back to ourselves, to our true self, to know who we are, and to find an identity outside of something that stamps you with one. The scientific or the natural world, the atheistic perspective of life, after having lived most of your life with this master narrative where everything happens for a reason, and the chaos, and I think some of the existential anxiety that kind of drove you to religion, we find ourselves in it. And these are some things, I think these are some, like you said, the bag of tricks or whatever you said, these are some things that maybe we can, like you said, take a deep breath and tiptoe back into what maybe, we have deemed as dangerous territory, and figuring out that we can cherry pick it and maybe even enhance our lives by these things.
Ditch the stuff that, that's the thing I don't get. Like, why is there shame in ditching all the bullshit?
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Let's do it.
Yeah. Well, and that's giving yourself permission. And I think maybe hopefully that's something we're taking away as well as giving ourselves permission to ditch the bullshit.
I like it. That's your next book.
There's a lot of bullshit, but I think all the bullshit is like just human invention.
Yeah. Well, I would say what else is there? But
what else is there? It's true. It's all human invention, right?
Yeah.
Anything that doesn't push us to be better and more loving is really bullshit.
Yeah.
Amen.
I
agree.
Appreciate you talking to us.
Yeah. Excellent stuff.
Thank you, guys.
Corinna Nicolaou.
Yes.
And the book is A Nun's Story, Searching for Meaning Inside Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism, and Islam.
Right. Yeah. There was a couple of moments where I'm thinking, does this lady know, any history of the religion? Does she know the theology? Then I realized no, and she doesn't care to know.
Doesn't care, yeah.
No, she wants to pick, like we say, cherry pick, take the good stuff and get rid of the bullshit, as she said.
Yeah.
And get rid of the bullshit means if you're not going to be expansive and open and embracing others, and loving others, fuck it, it's gone.
Yeah.
I'm not going to use it. Doesn't matter where it comes from. Doesn't matter who says it. It's out. I love it.
Yeah.
So I can get into that.
So
absolutely.
just this last week, I represented humanism on a panel discussion in my third year in a row. The Interfaith Council at Vanderbilt University puts on this panel discussion, interfaith panel. There was a Christian, a Baha'i, a Hindu, a Muslim, and myself. This year, it varies year after year, but it's typically 4, 5, 6 representations of different world religions. And honestly, a lot like this particular episode, I get tired of dragging this thing along, whether it's, whatever religion it is. We all know that it's man-made. We all know, well, not we all, but most of us, those of us who have acknowledged that this is all man-made, meaning-making, storytelling, pattern-seeking creatures. Yeah. You don't need it. You can be fine without it, whatever. Now, but I think what Corinna is teaching us is, wait a second, that's presumptuous of you to say, I don't need it. You don't need it, and that's fine. Yeah. But some of us do, and she obviously did. Here she is, completely secular, raised secular.
Right.
Doesn't have a religious bone in her body as far as that which was externally fed to her.
Right.
And yet, she's like, hey, something's missing. She goes on a journey, and she does find toxicity there. There's bad, there's underbelly, there's ugly, and yet, almost like panning for gold. And she finds this little nugget and she puts it in her knapsack and she moves on.
Right. And she can use it and makes her feel better. And what's wrong with that?
Exactly. I think what I'm taking away is purging my heart and mind from this presumptuous, almost fundamentalist version of atheism to where I know what's right for everybody.
No.
I know that this is all bullshit, and the sooner you come to think like me and agree with me, the happier you're going to be. You see what I'm saying? The presumption of fundamentalist atheism.
I do have that presumption, too. I mean, I don't say it, but I know I have it.
We both have said it at times on the show.
I don't go, I guess I do say, what's the matter with you?
Yeah.
Because it just seems like you're.
And there's hardly any way for that to not be condescending.
I know, but they're in such pain. And I'm doing it out of love, and I think there are answers in science and those kind of things. And I maybe we're a little too intellectual. I mean, not that I think I'm an intellectual, but I mean,
we're smarty pants.
Well, I want to tell people, do the work. Do the work, man. Read the book. Think about it. Don't just accept. Think.
Yeah.
And then decide for yourself. Don't, but who's going to listen to me?
Yeah. Well, and people, I mean,
So-
not that Corinna would say this to you, but in some ways she is.
Well, she did the work, I think.
Well, she did the work, but
Yeah.
she's also saying, hey, look, you leave me alone. I mean, I
Yeah,
think that
right.
everybody has, at the end of the day, we can say that no two people on the planet believe the same things. And at the end of the day, everybody's the steward of their own happiness.
Yeah.
And so as long as, your rights end where mine begin, that type of thing.
Yeah.
Where it's like, as long as your little beliefs, no matter what they are, as long as they don't infringe on me, knock yourself out.
Yeah. And clearly we have to have some beliefs in common, not necessarily religious beliefs, but,
Well, yeah.
we have to have a society and a culture and a government. and
Yeah,
what
where
have
we
you.
have to cohabitate.
Yeah, right. But you're right. Don't push those on. As you said, expand, make it expansive, embrace more and more people. Everybody gets to play,
Yeah.
not taking people
More
out.
elastic,
Yeah, more elastic.
amiable.
Yeah, good.
Thanks a lot, man.
Yeah, always good. Let's try it again. We got another one coming up, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Okay. All right. I'll see you then.
Start another day. They can't order me to stop dreaming.